can hear the intro music playing, so that means it must be time to start. This is Ask a Lawyer with Blaine Cluton. I get a lot of questions about false accusations, and they're probably the most frequent topic of discussion. So today's episode is going to be talking about false accusation. I got to start out the show by saying I'm an attorney, but I'm not your attorney. If you have questions at the end of this, please talk to a lawyer. These are a good starting place and a good place to get some ideas. What we're going to be talking about today are some frequently asked questions and then some defense tips that I like to go over with folks so that they have a better idea of how to handle these false accusations. The general tips go like this. Don't contact the accuser. Don't tamper with the witness. You should continue to gather information and even consider hiring a private investigator or forensic analysis done. Find other false accusations made by that person, so if they have some sort of history. Limit your emotion and your verbalization response. Record information and take notes. Listen and understand the accusation. Don't admit anything or sign anything. Limit the scope of others that are involved, and as much as you can, reduce stress throughout the process. Now, let's talk about, generally speaking, how these false accusations are coming up in questions that I'm receiving. So about half of the questions that I receive about false accusations are where a false accusation is coupled with some sort of other allegations. Let's take, for instance, any sort of false accusation about you did this or you said this or you created this. That would be the false accusation, and you are sitting there saying that this did not happen. Typically what happens is that you have this accusation and it's coupled now with the person saying, and because you did X, you're in violation of Y. And violation of Y means that you've done something wrong. You're accused of some sort of wrongdoing. Now, if the wrongdoing you're accused of is a crime, or if there's some sort of accusation of a crime or an allegation of a crime, at that point, and I've said it a lot of times, you need to hire an attorney. There's mountains of research and information available all over the place about why you should not be trying to defend criminal allegations on your own. You should seek a competent attorney to help you out with that process so that you can navigate the tricky criminal waters and not have to go it alone. If you're accused of wrongdoing at work, that is going to be outside the scope of what this discussion is today, although some of the tips will have crossover with work, but that's not the purpose of the discussion. What we're talking about is, generally speaking, these tips for responding to false accusations and how they're usually coming up in the context of these questions are that there's a person that's made an accusation, one individual to another individual, and they likely have some sort of relationship. Now, a relationship could mean business associates. It could be some sort of familial relationship. There could be some romantic relationship. The relationship itself is not really the question. It's just that that's the context that these things are coming up. Now, let's get into these tips. As far as that first one, don't contact the accuser. Don't tamper with the witness. In general, if you're contacting the person that's accused you of something, once you reach out to them, if it's a criminal case, most likely there's going to be a no contact order in place. And if you contact them, that's a violation. And again, I really don't want to get into the criminal aspects of cases because you should have a defense attorney helping you out for that. But that would likely be a violation of the no contact order. So you shouldn't be doing that as a general rule. But when you're responding to the person that's made the accusation, you're likely just giving them ammunition about what you're saying and how they're going to respond to you. And I assume that if you're calling them, in a lot of states, you're allowed to record with single party consent, meaning I'm in Oregon and I call another individual. They can record me without my permission So I actually just assume whenever I make a phone call to somebody that I'm being recorded. You should do the same. You should assume that every phone call that you're making is being recorded. Any contact that you have with the accuser, even if it seems friendly enough to you, they could turn around and say they were trying to intimidate me or coerce me into dropping this accusation. And finally, on this don't contact, what you're saying to them could be deemed to be an admission, even if you don't intend it to be that way. So you've just got to be extremely careful. And realistically, you might accidentally make an admission, even though you're being extremely cautious. So these are tricky waters. They're difficult to navigate. And the best advice off the top is just don't contact that accuser if they're trying to reach out to you. You shouldn't be reaching out back to them. The second tip here is gather information, consider hiring a private investigator, and consider doing forensic analysis. Now, generally speaking at this point, no matter what region you're in, where you're at in the United States or abroad, private investigators are generally available. Of course, you can do your own sleuth work online and get some information that's available on the internet, but that has limitations, and private investigators will oftentimes have access to greater systems tools online that would give them access to more information, or they have other ways of gathering that information. But aside from the obvious online, what we would want to do is ethical surveillance to make sure that they are monitoring and tracking and gathering information that would be useful in your false accusation case, and gathering information that you can then subsequently use against them, hopefully to show other dishonest acts or convictions that they have, to find out that they're actually a drug abuser or a drug user, and that is impacting their ability to make truthful allegations in general, that they have previous false statements or allegations that they've made, and that the investigator could uncover those. And so we're trying to erode their credibility. And that's what all of these actions are doing as you're gathering this information. And along with that, that next tip is find other false accusations. So that does dovetail back into gathering information. But if you can find another history of false accusations, for instance, if they've made other false accusations in their workplace or against other individuals that were proven to be false ultimately, then those are really going to help you in your case ultimately in showing that the allegations against you are also false. The next tip here is to limit emotion and verbalization response as you're hearing the information. What the person likely is looking for when they initially are contacting you is an emotional response. And generally speaking, people, when they're making an emotional response, that emotional response is not necessarily the best reflection of themselves when they're responding emotionally. Generally, the best reflection of yourself is one where you're composed and you've had a good opportunity to be reflective and put your best foot forward about what you want to say, and it's thoughtful rather than reacting in the moment. And so if to the extent that you have an opportunity to carefully consider your response and you're not acting emotionally in the moment and verbalizing that response emotionally in the moment, then that is going to benefit you down the line in dealing with these false accusations. The next is to record information and take notes. And I'm not necessarily saying in the context of a digital recording, although depending on what state you're in, that might be appropriate. Recording information just means writing down and having a careful ledger of what's happened so that you can keep track of all the information that's available, what they're saying, so that as the narrative or storyline shifts, you can catch them in those different falsehoods. And also, you need to have the best understanding of what all of the information that they're alleging against you is so that you can properly defend yourself. And along with recording this information, the next tip is to listen and understand the accusations. I know that in the moment it's difficult because you're being accused of something that just simply is not true. But if you're missing something, they might say something that has some kernel or through line of truth along with their false accusation. You need to be able to distinguish and separate those things between what's truth and what's false. The only way that you can properly make those separations is for you to listen, and along with that, recording and taking notes about what they're saying so that you can help to really clarify which things are true and which are false. I said earlier that you might accidentally admit something when you're contacting the accuser. This next tip is don't admit or sign anything. And if you do, or if you plan to admit or sign something, you should get counsel before you do that to make sure that you're admitting or signing what you intend to do. But very, very likely what's going on is that there would be some sort of document that would be trying to be exchanged with you where perhaps they might say, here's a waiver or a release of liability. If you sign this, we can have it over with. And practically speaking, it says something else in there, buried in there. And so you should not be signing that without advice of counsel. The next tip was to limit the scope of others involved. And what I mean by that is obviously you're going to have people that you're confiding in throughout this process, but you need to be careful not to involve somebody that's actually on the accuser's side, because you could be unknowingly feeding information back to that accuser that you didn't actually want them to receive. And also, not everybody wants to be involved in this tangle web of lies that this accuser has made. And if you're trying to involve other folks, then they might not want to be involved with this false accusation process in fear of reprisal, or that other people are going to be dragged into this same process and they don't want to be a part of it. So you really need to carefully consider the scope of the people that you're going to have involved in your dilemma that you're facing. Who are you going to have involved? Who do you trust the most that you're going to confide in? You need to really carefully consider that, and I'm recommending to limit that scope of others that are involved. And the final tip here is life is hard, and so you need to consider how are you going to reduce your stress. This likely isn't the only stressor that you have in your life. If you're facing a false accusation, likely you have very many other stressors in life, work, family, some other challenges that you're facing, and now you've got this on top of all of that. So, how are you going to reduce stress? There's certain things that are probably not going to help reduce your stress and certain things that will. Obviously, the common answers are things like exercise, meditation, and praying. I think that everybody at this point knows what the different outlets are to potentially reduce stress, but acting on that and following through with taking careful care of your mental health and your physical health as this process progresses is extremely important, because as I mentioned earlier when I was talking about limiting emotion and verbalization, by reducing your stress, you're generally going to have a better response to what's happening around you. If you're constantly stressed out, if you're constantly bombarded and you're letting these things impact you, you're likely going to make a mistake somewhere along the line. So, reviewing again, we talked first about FAQs and how these false accusations would be popping up. And as I mentioned, about half of the time, we have some sort of allegation, some false accusation, along with an allegation of wrongdoing. And so these tips that I've given were designed in responding to those types of situations. Obviously, outside the scope of this discussion were accusations of crime, where I've recommended you get an attorney, or accused of a wrongdoing at work, which I would also recommend that you would get an attorney to help you along with that process. So quickly to review these tips, don't contact the accuser, gather information, find out other false accusations, limit your emotion and your verbalization response, take notes, listen, don't admit or sign anything, limit the scope of others involved, and reduce your stress. I know that this is an extremely difficult topic because it is one of the most commonly asked questions, and I understand for good reason. It seems that every day false accusation claims continue to rise. I don't know why that is. I don't know whether it's a situation where there's more and more regulations and rules that are in place that people are really having a hard time following. And so we have the allegation of some wrongdoing coupled with the false accusation. So it's easier to make this accusation against the person, or more people are just flouting the law. I also don't know whether it just might be a matter of boredom and they don't have anything else to do, so they make these false accusations, or that people are just becoming more emboldened, that they feel that because there is no mechanism in place to really punish somebody who's making false accusations. I don't know why it's happening, but it's happening more and more, and it's astonishing to me, number one, that it even exists. I don't understand why in a free society like the United States that this would occur, other than people are just so narcissistic and self-centered that they feel that it's appropriate. But the thing that you need to keep in mind is that your best defense is your brain. So you need to follow the best advice that I can give, which is get an attorney if you have questions, and follow and be thoughtful in your responses as you go forward. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to having you on the next session. Until then, this session is adjourned.